Hello, my darlings, and happy Halloween! Isn't this just the best time of the year? I certainly think so. I am very excited to read this story. I wanted to read it so badly since I read it. It's by DayDalia, and that's why you're getting this special Monday story, is because Halloween is tomorrow, my darlings. Are you all ready? The title of this story is I'm Finally Ready to Talk About What Happened Last Halloween. Tomorrow, my sister would be 23. It's going to be a rough one for my parents, but I don't think they can give up hope that any second she'll breeze right in the front door to blow out the candles on her cake. She won't, of course. I think my sister might be dead. She was always so stupid. Please understand that I say that with all love. Laura was naive and trusting, gullible. The police still think she ran off with one of her many past flings. Any boy could have told her any lie and she'd swallow his story. Hook, line, and sinker. I tried my best as an older sister to install her with some kind of backbone, to help her hone her skepticism. I was the older, warier sister, the cynic. The fact that she's still missing is evidence of my failures. It was a Halloween party. The invitation was the most gorgeous thing I've ever seen in my life. A gold leaf pressed oak leaf, with alluring cursive in words of silver. Pinterest would have lost its collective mind over the craftsmanship. Laura never told me where the invitation came from, only that it was members of the in-crowd of her small liberal arts college who received them. Exclusive. Of course she wanted to go. It was her last hurrah of youth. The final year before school let out, and she had to face the real world as a real adult. Parties in the graduating year take on a sort of desperation, like a single chick on New Year's frantically searching the crowd for a kiss in the final minutes of the countdown. I don't miss college, and I don't miss college parties. But Laura wouldn't go alone. She was adamant. Halloween was always my favorite holiday, and she used that in the week it took to wear me down, talking about costumes and how we were going to show everyone else up. She wanted to be the hottest one there. I wasn't resentful that standing next to my plain self would make her shine all the brighter. I wasn't. She wanted to be the it girl of the in crowd. I loved the challenge of sewing the costumes. Found some incredible patterns for flapper girls from the Roaring Twenties. Laura didn't catch the irony of me basing her on Daisy Buchanan at The Great Gatsby. It suited her. She was stunning in it, though she could have worn a burlap sack and had the same effect. We spent the day of the party hanging out and catching up. Laura sat on the counter of my tiny studio apartment, sipping rosé and cracking jokes while I baked brownies. She brought the bottle for herself. I don't drink at parties. The brownies were a gift for the host. Laura teased me about it because it's not going to be that kind of party, silly. Not some house party where nachos were considered a home-cooked meal, she meant. Not the kind of party I usually got invited to. Technically, I hadn't been invited at all, which of course is why I wanted to bring brownies in the first place. Mom always told us we should never show up empty-handed at a gathering. A bottle of wine would have been more appropriate, I guess, but I couldn't bring myself to face going into a liquor store to buy one. I hadn't drunk in a year, not since the last party I'd been to. I didn't have a sobriety chip to mark the occasion, just the scars. I don't mind taking the role of Dee Dee, Put my mind at ease, knowing I can offer a safe ride home so no one has to try anything stupid. The autumn drive was golden. The setting rays of the sun lit the woods like each tree was admitting their own light. The air through the open car windows was perfume, the sweetness of leaves beginning to decay. I have a perfectly clear memory of the light hitting Laura's profile at the perfect angle to make her eyes glow as she grinned and fiddled with the music, carefree and unburdened in a snapshot of what would have been a perfect day. We took some wrong turns. The invitation's directions were precise, but the twists and turns of a small rural roads got the best of us a few times. It wasn't until after sunset that we found the cluster of other cars in an otherwise unassuming patch of bare dirt that let us know we'd arrived at the right place. We went the rest of the way on foot, guided by the sound of music. I thought the invitation had been a work of art, but it paled in comparison to the spectacle that was the rest of the party. If you gathered the greatest minds of the greatest hipster wedding blogs and shut them in a think tank with an unlimited budget for a month, you might get something close. The clearing was dominated at the center by a single tree, the most massive oak I'd ever seen in my life. The boughs were laden with what must have been hundreds of colored glass jars each, lit by a tiny flickering candle. "My camera!" My sister clutched my arm suddenly. "I can't believe I forgot my camera!" I was too awestruck to respond. Belatedly, I realized the music had led us down the path was live. A 5-piece acoustic band played something I imagined to be the background soundtrack of Florence Welch's Brain. I thought I'd poured my heart and soul into our costumes. I suddenly felt very inadequate and underdressed. Apparently it was a themed party. Nearly every other guest was in elaborate stage-quality costumes that could have any second broken into a production of A Midsummer Night's Dream. A masquerade menagerie of forest animals milled through the clearing. The animal head masks were startlingly detailed. A hawk glared sideways at me from across a massive bonfire, and the flames danced in the liquid reflection of his resin eyes. There was a collective shift as we entered the scene. Subtle, but there all the same, as if we were understudies that had disrupted the flow of a rehearsal. Ah, I thought, theater majors. A stag-headed man stepped smoothly through the space to greet us. His voice was muffled through the mask, but baritone and pleasant. I wondered if he belonged to the band and was taking a break.
"Welcome. We're glad you made it. It's a bit of a labyrinth on those country roads. Please, help yourself to any refreshments you like. We're only just getting started."
He gestured to a pair of long, low wooden tables, laden with platters of mouth-watering food. I was suddenly eager to hide my own offering behind my back, but our host was gracious about it.
"A gift," he said. "How very old-fashioned of you. Thank you. I believe there's room on the end of the table."
I know how it looks typed out like that, but he didn't make it sound like an insult. Laura was only half paying attention. She was still taking in the drool-worthy decorations. I knew she was seething at herself for leaving the camera behind. As a photographer, that thing was practically a third eye for her. Our host excused himself, and I was relieved to spot others I recognized from Laura's social group. Now that my eyes had adjusted, they were easy to pick out. It was obvious we weren't the only ones who didn't know this party was going to be themed. The guy in an ironic, sexy nurse costume looked acutely self-conscious. Most were gathered around the tables with cups in their hands, awkwardly waiting for the alcohol to kick in, dependent on it as a social lubricant. I squinted at the dishes. There was no way those were real silver, right? Laura's friends cooed over her getup and filled her in on everything they'd observed so far. Heavy smoke from the main bonfire veiled the partygoers. I guess they were using green wood. The crowd flowed in circles like a massive slow-motion square dance. Some were handing out party favors to others, ribbons and flower crowns and things like that. Groups formed and dissolved according to some unknowable pattern, shifting like motes of dust in the beams of sunlight. People came and went, obscured by the smoke, as the sky deepened to a silky darkness. I was stiff and awkward on the fringes of the crowd. Everyone had a drink in their hand, and it seemed like everyone wanted to put one in mine. I waved off more offers than I could count. A sparrow, a rabbit, a pair of feral-looking foxes. With the many masks, it felt like feeding day at the petting zoo. Only I was the animal in the pen. It was overwhelming, overstimulating. I couldn't focus well enough to carry on a conversation. Each thought I had was as hard to catch as smoke that stung my eyes and settled heavily in my lungs. It was perfumed with something, I thought, until I saw a bear throw a leafy branch under the flames. The fragrance was only leaves. I don't drink at parties. I had very little to do until the music picked up, and I felt something wild singing out in my blood. A ripple of excitement made waves through the party, and wordlessly the people began to dance. I finally saw Laura again, the stag-headed host leading her to the middle of it all. What was his name? Had he ever said? Even as I joined the dance, I kept to the edges of it. My feet were clumsy and I didn't know the steps. Some sort of folk dance with a lot of twirling and getting passed back and forth. Maybe everyone in 20 people I linked arms with were one of Laura's friends. They were having an easier time of it, the gloss of drunkenness in their eyes. Their movements freer as their inhibitions loosened. There was something happening to us. The dance was too fast for us to speak, and I couldn't make myself form words, but there was an understanding with every fleeting spin when we made eye contact. Our feet picked up, faster and higher. There was something happening to us. I broke the flow of the dance like a heavy stone thrown in a still pond, pushing and jostling my way out. I needed to be away from the smoke and the touching. Hands on my elbows, on my arms, my shoulders, as each dancer tried to pull me back in. A forest of grabbing hands and leering teeth and fixed grins. I couldn't breathe. In the harsh shadows cast by the flicker of the flames, the masks warped and changed. The fur looked denser, the feathers more jeweled. What at the beginning of the night appeared rubber now moved like flesh. Animal eyes rolled in their sockets to watch me as I struggled through. I had to find Laura. She was still with the stag, a tiara on her head. It shone with the luster of real gold, though I could have sworn I'd only seen plastic before. An ornate clay bottle was being passed, hand to hand through the dance. The stag's eyes met mine as he took a swig. The lips somehow warped and wrapped around the neck of the bottle, as if they were his own. He laughed and his tongue was wine-stained. The dance changed, somehow impossibly faster and wilder. Hands were still on me, but this time pushing me away rather than pulling me in. I was forced out. Away from the smoke wasn't any better. Fog lay heavy and thick under the branches. The air was cleaner, though. It smelled like cool water and the promise of rain. I couldn't get a sense of time. I couldn't separate this party from the last. Couldn't separate myself from the self of a year ago. I wasn't drunk this round, but the confusion, and thoughtless panic were the same. What happened to me then wasn't happening now. I hadn't had a drop to drink this time around. Something touched my hands, and I wheeled back. I hit the dirt hard and scrambled back until I couldn't anymore, hemmed in by the brush. I couldn't get my legs to obey me, to lift me off the ground and run. I was as helpless as the first time. It was the hawk. When he spoke, the words were strained, warped, coming out of a throat never meant to mimic human speech.
"It's rude," he was saying. "It's rude to refuse a host's generosity the way you have. We've offered you everything you could want. Fine drinks and food, and music and trinkets, and you take nothing. You're ungrateful, and your insults will not be tolerated."
There was something in his hand, and it glinted coldly. My stomach dropped. I could think of nothing to do. I could think of nothing at all. I was going to die here without even understanding why. Then he stopped. The stag was there. I hadn't seen him arrive. The whole party was behind him, the music dead. They watched with bloodshot eyes, foam at the corners of their wretched mouths.
"It is not our guest who is being rude. See, she has brought us a gift."
My brownies. They were still on the table. Crappy paper plate nestled among silver platters and crystal bowls. Somehow they looked even shittier than before. The stag leaned close to the hawk and lowered his voice.
"So watch your tongue lest you lose it. Some of us still abide by the rules of old-fashioned hospitality."
He winked at me. His eyelid was creased. He had never looked more real. Certainly he was more real than I was. I was nothing but a creature in a trap. I was nothing but formless fear and confusion piled in human skin. Laura's arm was still linked with his. The fire lit her face like she was admitting her own light. A pretty illusion. She didn't say a word. Her eyes were drunk and far away. I became aware of the music once more. Farther away this time. The dance resumed like nothing had ever disturbed it. The crowd ebbed and flowed, moving in unknowable patterns. But every step took them farther away from me. By the time shame got me back on my feet, they were on the far side of the clearing. The oak had been stripped of its lights. I could see them bobbing and weaving with the dancers as they slipped through the trees and into the mist. I couldn't catch up with them. Everywhere I put my feet was wrong. Every step there was something to trip on or something to snag my costume, forcing me to fall behind even further while I untangled myself. At some point, I lost them. I stood alone in the bone-chilling fog until violent shivers ripped me from my stupor. Somehow I found my car again. Somehow I got it started and drove home without ever having a thought. The next day I reported my sister as missing. All I could tell them was that we had gone to a party and she had left with a guy I didn't know. I tried to show them the invitation. It was tacky spray paint and metallic marker on a crumbling leaf. Not at all like I remembered it. In mid-November, I went back to the clearing. In broad daylight, it took me hours of wrong turns to find it. It was so much smaller than I recall. If not for the oak, I would have thought it wasn't the same place at all. The oak was dead and rotting where it stood. There was a table of sorts, a fallen tree with a roughly hewn chunk out of the top to make a lumpy surface. None of the craftsmanship I'd admired. The whole area was littered with garbage. Crushed plastic bottles, filthy cans and plastic bags. Here and there were trampled pieces of cheap plastic costume jewelry. The kind you find in a kids' party section of the dollar store. I retraced my steps the best I could. A little beyond where I remember stopping, the ground gave way to a ravine. Not a deep one, not the kind you can lose a party of 200. Just 6 feet deep, just enough to loom over my head as I studied the end of it, where the exposed roots of a tree above the ravine reached down and formed a rough arch shape with nothing but solid rock behind them. Tomorrow is my sister's birthday. She's not going to waltz back home like she's attended some twisted surprise party. It's too early for that. The door won't be open yet. I'm finally ready to talk about what happened last Halloween, because this one, when the doors open again, I'll be going through to bring her home. So quoth this raven. Oh, you know I love stories about the Fae. And Halloween, of course. Tomorrow I am hoping to live stream a story or two at my annual Halloween party. If I can't live stream it, I will attempt to record it and post it later. I have a beautiful new fire pit to put in my driveway this year, so the fireside stories I hope will be good. I will see you tomorrow. I have another story coming out, and then tomorrow night, the big night. I hope you all have your costumes ready.